Death Star, the Infinity Gauntlet, Kevin Feige. These are some of the most powerful weapons that Disney has at its disposal. And now that Kevin Feige is making a Star Wars movie, the franchise promises to have unlimited power.
We're doomed.
So what can Marvel Studios teach Star Wars to finally make the ultimate space opera that our Force visions are made of? Join ScreenRant as we go through these 15 things that Star Wars can learn from the MCU.
This is where the fun begins.
First things first, since Star Wars is getting Kevin Feige, Lucasfilm is going to learn firsthand from this guy as he works. Feige came into power at Marvel after proving himself as a producer on some of the 20th Century Fox Marvel films of the early 2000s. At that time, he was exactly what Marvel needed. It may be hard to imagine, but Marvel Comics was in financial straits towards the end of the last century, and they decided to sell the movie rights to their biggest franchises in order to stay afloat. Feige's track record as a dependable and visionary guy was built over the course of the 14 movies he produced before getting the MCU off the ground. Currently, there are no plans for Feige to do anything more than produce a film set in the Star Wars universe, but if it's successful, he'll do more. Since the Kathleen Kennedy-led Star Wars films launched with a bang in 2015, it seems like she'll remain the head honcho at Lucasfilm for the time being. But it's important to note that Feige's success rate is almost unmatched in the industry. Of the top 10 highest-grossing films of all time, the MCU can claim 4 movies on that list. Avengers Endgame earned just about $3 billion, and after helping to negotiate deals that brought Spider-Man back into the MCU fold, he also plans to bring the other jewels in Marvel Comics' crown, the X-Men and the Fantastic Four, to the MCU. The biggest lesson Lucasfilm can learn from Marvel is simply to bring Feige on board, and now that he's there, trust his instincts. If the studios are going to toss a lot of money back and forth, the least they can do is invest in his ideas and keep him around. The latest set of Star Wars films, from 2015's The Force Awakens through 2019's The Rise of Skywalker, have been famous, or infamous, for their quick back-to-back releases. Marvel has also released movies one after the other, but when they started the franchise with Iron Man way back in 2008, they appeared to have a lot more story planned in advance than Star Wars seemed to have. And even with the storylines they had in the works, the Marvel team still took a bit more time to build out the brand and flesh out each individual tentpole character before uniting them in 2012's Avengers. Feige knows how to take his time and gain the confidence of the fan base rather than oversaturate the market, a criticism that some have leveled at Lucasfilm. Let's face it, we all love Star Wars, and it's amazing to live in a time where we have so much Star Wars to look forward to. But when you compare our current Star Wars era to that of the original trilogy or even the prequels, where movies were released once every 3 years, you have to wonder how some of the latest movies like The Last Jedi and Solo would have been received if Lucasfilm spent more time developing and tweaking them before their release. With news that attendance is shockingly low at Star Wars Galaxy's Edge in Disneyland and Disney World, you have to wonder whether some of the more casual fans are feeling a Star Wars overload. And maybe it's just because the stories that we have seen so far are too much of the same thing. In order to make future Star Wars stories work, they need to have mass appeal while still subverting audience expectations. Maybe the Lucasfilm Story Group should look at how the MCU's creative teams plan out their storylines. Marvel Studios has consistently exceeded storytelling expectations, balancing the releases of smaller standalone films with larger team-up films. Their strategy actually seems like the inspiration for Lucasfilm's original plans to balance out the bigger Skywalker saga movies with the standalone spin-offs like Rogue One and Solo. But most of the films, especially Solo, just weren't the behemoth moneymakers that the studio expected. So what's the issue here? Is it the way Lucasfilm's Story Group seems to control every detail about the Star Wars galaxy? Have they become like a galactic empire? Too concerned about controlling the previously undefined details of the Star Wars galaxy rather than focusing on the big picture? Whether this sequel trilogy of Star Wars movies has been carefully plotted in advance or not, Lucasfilm could learn a thing or two about planning out multi-film story arcs from their friends at Marvel Studios. Not only has Marvel been better at balancing the types of films they make, whether they be comedic buddy films, zany space epics, or political dramas, but they happen to do it with loads of heart and humor, all while minimizing the fan backlash as much as possible. Hey, you don't make $3 billion movies by accident. It certainly seems like the latest Star Wars films have been a mix of big ideas and appealing characters. However, these charismatic actors are all thrown together in a rehash of the Rebel vs. Empire struggle, just set 30 years later. While we all love watching plucky freedom fighters battle their way from point A to point B, many critics have noted that the latest trilogy doesn't yet seem to have a consistent arc. Despite the fact that there's a story group working tirelessly to ensure each movie has a clear connection and continuity, it still feels like they're making these films up as they go. And J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy change up the narrative of Lucasfilm's behind-the-scenes process depending on the interview. Before them, George Lucas wasn't much different. He waffled depending on the day, sometimes saying he had the whole Star Wars saga storyline planned from the beginning. Other times, it seemed old Georgie made it up as he went. The biggest example of this being all the times that Lucas said he always planned for Darth Vader to be revealed as Luke's father, even though drafts of the Empire Strikes Back script included the appearance of a kind-hearted Anakin Skywalker as a Force ghost until 1978. It was then in the sequel's second draft that Darth Vader was changed from Anakin Skywalker's rival to Anakin himself. With a story group dedicated to keeping the big picture in mind, the writers should be able to operate the same way Marvel Studios screenwriters work, focusing on making the individual films as funny, heartfelt, and fresh as possible, pushing the boundaries of what we once thought was possible in a Star Wars film while introducing us to exciting new worlds. Despite much of the fan outcry, The Last Jedi tried to do this. In fact, most of The Last Jedi's issues had to do with its inability to pick a clear and compelling destination for its characters. The conflict makes sense, but the resolution doesn't necessarily hold water. Actually, The Last Jedi often feels like a movie in which the characters tread water between point A and point B, rather than move definitively from A to B. For example, we're given this exciting relationship between Rey and Kylo Ren, and the two characters offer bold new options to each other. Kylo can join Rey in saving what was once lost, i.e. the old Order of the Republic and the Jedi, or Rey can join Kylo in letting the past die and creating something new. By the end of the film, neither happens. They instead double down on the light versus dark, resistance versus first order dynamic. Look, sure, it wouldn't be Star Wars without a clear line between good and evil, but we've seen this before, and many would argue it was done better in the original trilogy. So the most interesting conflict introduced in The Last Jedi becomes a conventional Star Wars storyline by the end of that same film. For all the reviewers who are complimenting The Last Jedi's originality, the movie ultimately didn't break the mold when it came to intergalactic storytelling. Yes, it's true, Marvel can be formulaic when presenting their origin stories, but they've figured out how to mix up genres, styles, and character pairings. They know how to keep things fresh in ways that Star Wars struggles with. And the difficulty that Star Wars has had in appealing to the changing tastes of audiences can be linked back to the decisions of the top brass at Lucasfilm. You might be surprised to learn that Star Wars is the reason Marvel didn't fold in the 1970s. Thanks to the success of 1977's Star Wars, the comic book issues based on the movie, which appeared under Marvel Comics banner, were top sellers. George Lucas's space opera saved the house that Stan Lee built. And now, Marvel Comics should return the favor. With many successful titles in Marvel's relaunched Star Wars comics, which came back to store shelves around the release of 2015's The Force Awakens, there are plenty of exciting stories just asking to be adapted into awesome cinematic events. The MCU hasn't shied away from adapting more recent events in Marvel Comics chronology. With the success of standalone storylines and, say, the popularity of Donald Glover's take on Lando, despite the mixed reception of Solo, why not adapt the heisty Lando comic into a fun starring vehicle for Glover? And heck, bring back Phil Lord and Chris Miller to make nice after firing them during Solo's production. Besides Solo, Lucasfilm could do right by fans by considering adaptations of the popular Dr. Aphra series, give Oscar Isaac more to do in a Poe Dameron spin-off, or bring back Mark Hamill's voice to do an animated take on the events that occur between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back in an animated adaptation of the flagship Star Wars series. Something that many fans may think Marvel has over the latest Star Wars movies is its abundance of memorable action set pieces. Sure, there's a lot of action in the latest Star Wars films, and when you think back on the movies as a whole, you might fondly recall the opening chase of The Force Awakens as Rey and Finn flee the First Order and make their way to the Millennium Falcon. You may remember the lightsaber battle between Rey and Kylo, or Luke's standoff against the First Order's walkers in The Last Jedi, or the Kessel Run in Solo, or the climactic battle on Scarif in Rogue One. That said, for each of the movie's 2 to 2.5 hour runtimes, there doesn't seem to be as many complex action scenes and diverse locations packed into the Star Wars films as, say, Guardians of the Galaxy, which manages to take us from Morag to Xandar to nowhere and beyond at a breakneck speed. A solution? Bring back Lord and Miller. We mentioned them before and we weren't joking. They showed off their keen eye for detail and their fast-paced visual style with the Lego Movie and, by association, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Phil Lord and Chris Miller would be the perfect pair to lead the charge to pushing Star Wars into a more visually complex and cinematically challenging direction. And while we're talking about directing duos, let's throw the Russo brothers into the mix. Following the MCU's Phase 1, which introduced the main heroes before culminating in the shockingly successful Avengers film in 2012, Marvel Studios turned to a duo who had cut their teeth as sitcom directors. After filming an indie called Pieces, Steven Soderbergh gave the Russos the opportunity to direct You, Me, and Dupree. This led to stints working on TV shows like Arrested Development and Community. Kevin Feige saw something special in these guys and trusted them to make some of the more emotionally complex MCU films, including Captain America: The Winter Soldier, Captain America: Civil War, Avengers: Infinity War, and Avengers: Endgame. It's not just Feige's ability to place complete trust in his filmmakers that's helped the MCU reach its current level of success. It's that he manages to find the right filmmakers to trust in the first place. Taika Waititi is directing an episode of The Mandalorian, proving that Star Wars has already taken some valuable notes from the MCU's playbook. But they shouldn't just stop there. Not only should Lucasfilm keep Taika in consideration for any future Star Wars films in the works, especially if his Mandalorian episode is a success, but Kathy Kennedy and co. should look to him for punch-ups if future films are in trouble. Waititi has proven himself as a lighthearted and offbeat thinker who excels under pressure, showing that he can thrive in the studio system after churning out successful films on modest budgets. After all, he was able to make Thor and the Hulk more interesting than ever before in Thor Ragnarok, ringing out comedy gold by pairing Mark Ruffalo and Chris Hemsworth together. Not only is Waititi key to the future of the franchise, but Lucasfilm should be smart enough to be on the lookout for the next Waititi, just waiting to be discovered. With a couple of smaller projects in the works, including The Mandalorian and the upcoming Obi-Wan series, Lucasfilm is starting to branch out beyond its big screen commitments. But if the Russo brothers have proven one thing, it's that television is a great training ground for future blockbuster storytellers. And it seems like some of the more highbrow sitcoms might be training grounds for the next best voices in entertainment. Phoebe Waller-Bridge was given the supporting role of L337 in Solo, but she's doing the impossible at the moment, writing 2 shows, Fleabag and Killing Eve, while serving as a co-writer on Bond 25. If given the chance to run her own Star Wars project, she'd likely come up with something very interesting. Marvel banked on small screen talent, and it paid off big time. The least Lucasfilm could do is make a development deal with some of these newer voices. 30-something director Ryan Coogler first made a name for himself with the indie favorite Fruitvale Station. He followed this up with Creed and then the record-breaking and Oscar-nominated Black Panther. He knows how to make intense, intimate films and big-budget blockbusters that match the tone of the franchises that we know and love. This track record makes him perfect for Star Wars, which can use more of a balance of intense and intimate storytelling alongside its epic style. So far, Disney's pursuit of more diverse stories as well as on-screen and behind-the-scenes talent has been commendable for bringing Star Wars fully into the 21st century. A director like Coogler would add to that legacy and promise an exciting look at a new part of the galaxy. Gunn has a proven ability to tell stories about outsiders trying to make it in outer space. His Guardians of the Galaxy films have been huge hits, even getting kudos from Hollywood icons like Al Pacino. Gunn's sense of humor and offbeat scripting would take Star Wars to new heights, and his ability to adapt his voice to fit Lucasfilm's needs wouldn't be outside of the realm of possibility. While he was controversially removed from Guardians of the Galaxy 3 after some controversial tweets gained traction on social media, he was controversially reinstated as director of that third film. But before that, he's controversially directing the controversial Suicide Squad sequel for DC. Oftentimes, the controversies are blown out of proportion, but maybe James Gunn has just the right amount of danger to keep Star Wars interesting beyond the Skywalker saga. And if J.J. Abrams can hop from Star Trek to Star Wars, then Gunn can jump ship from Guardians. Okay, this may seem like an odd choice to make the list, but Kenneth Branagh knows how to bring a classical feel to a given film. The Shakespearean style that he brought to Thor would be perfect for depicting the more civilized age of the Old Republic. Besides, Branagh would be able to stamp out the kind of stilted dialogue and stiff performances that make Coruscant seem like it deserved to fall to the Empire in those prequels. With the Game of Thrones guys, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, set to take the reins of one of the upcoming Star Wars projects, we hope that their storyline will focus on the Knights of the Old Republic. And if they truly are bringing this earlier era of Jedi and Sith to life, then we really hope that they'll show us an entirely different side of Star Wars. Not just in visual styles and world building, but also in the personalities of their characters as well. The MCU has been able to contrast the grittiness of other settings with the grandiose world of Asgard. To see more of a variety in both the look and feel of future planets we'll be visiting will only help expand the Star Wars universe. Of course, one of the biggest things Marvel has going for it is its abundance of talent. And they all want to be in a Star Wars movie. Samuel L. Jackson's already had his shot, but who else from the Avengers films do you think would be perfect carrying a lightsaber or wielding a blaster? Well, it's not hard to imagine any of the MCU actors hopping into hyperspace. In fact, everyone from Chris Evans to Brie Larson has shown interest. But when it was first announced that Feige would be making a film in a galaxy far, far away, a source divulged that Kevin had already spoken to one of the actors in Marvel's payroll about a particular part. Which means that not only is a familiar face destined to go to outer space, but also Feige seems to already have a story drawn up for his Star Wars stint. When Disney Plus announced its lineup of shows, there was an embarrassment of riches. Not only would the House of Mouse's streaming service offer up a crazy amount of pre-existing content, but they'd create new TV series featuring one-offs and pairings of our favorite MCU characters. On the roster is Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Loki, WandaVision, Hawkeye, Ms. Marvel, Moon Knight, She-Hulk, and several documentary series. Star Wars, at least as we currently know it, is a bit more limited. And this sequel trilogy, as well as the two spin-off films, have served as an experiment for Lucasfilm to see how audiences would react to a yearly and sometimes twice-yearly release schedule. Now, Lucasfilm needs to make some tough decisions. They may have some smaller-scale animation projects on their schedule, and they continue churning out toys at a rate that would make Santa's elves jealous. But following the release of The Mandalorian, they need to figure out what really makes Star Wars, well, Star Wars. When they embrace that, they should be able to create a massive entertainment content that would give Marvel a run for its money.
Victory!
And since you made it to the end of the video, join the debate in the comments section. Respond below and let us know your thoughts about Star Wars, the MCU, and Feige's involvement. As we watch Kevin Feige's career with great interest, hit the subscribe button and keep following ScreenRant for more videos like this one. See you around!